Imagine walking into your garden and never picking up a hoe again. No backbreaking afternoons on your knees. No endless cycle of pulling the same weeds week after week. Sounds impossible. It isn't. There's a small group of plants that experienced gardeners have relied on for generations. Plants that crowd out, shade out, and choke out weeds before they ever get a foothold. Today I'm walking you through 10 of the best weed-suppressing plants you can add to your garden, why each one works and exactly where it thrives. Some smell incredible, some flower for months, some are tough as nails in full sun, others were made for the shadiest corner of your yard. If a low-maintenance, weed-free garden sounds appealing, stick around. And if you find this useful, consider subscribing to Senior's Gardening Advice so you don't miss the next one. Let's get into it. Plant 1. Lavender. Lavender is the plant most gardeners think of first when they picture a low-maintenance, high-impact border, and there's good reason for that reputation. Its silvery green foliage and unmistakable fragrance make it a favorite for pathways and beds, but underneath that beauty is a genuinely effective weed-suppressing plant. The mechanism is twofold. First, lavender's essential oils have mild allelopathic properties, meaning the compounds released from the foliage and roots can slow germination in some nearby weed seeds. It isn't a total chemical shield, but it does give lavender a competitive edge in the soil around it. Second, and more reliably, lavender's dense, woody growth habit and low branching structure physically shade the soil surface. Weed seeds need light to germinate, and a mature lavender plant simply doesn't leave much of it reaching the ground beneath. Lavender grows best in USDA zones 5 through 9, though English lavender varieties tolerate colder winters better than French or Spanish types. It wants full sun, at least 6 hours a day, and well-drained soil. This is one plant that actually prefers poor, lean soil over rich garden loam. Heavy, wet, or overly fertile ground is the most common reason lavender struggles or rots at the crown. Space plants 18 to 24 inches apart depending on the variety, since good air circulation is what keeps lavender healthy in humid climates. Once established, water deeply but infrequently. Established lavender is genuinely drought-tolerant and often does better on neglect than on attention. The main maintenance task is a single hard pruning after the flowers fade, cutting back roughly a third of the plant to keep it compact and prevent the woody, leggy growth that develops with age. Popular varieties include Munstead and Hidcote for compact hedges, Provence for cut flowers, and Phenomenal for gardeners in hot, humid regions where classic English lavender tends to struggle. Planted along a bed edge, a walkway, or anywhere soil tends to bake in full sun, and you'll get a fragrant, pollinator-friendly barrier that keeps weeds from creeping in from the border. The most common mistake with lavender is treating it like a typical flower bed plant, feeding it, mulching it heavily, and watering on a regular schedule. All three of those habits tend to shorten its life. Skip the fertilizer entirely in most soils. Use a thin layer of gravel or light mulch rather than bark or compost around the crown, and let the soil dry out between waterings. Lavender also pairs particularly well with other Mediterranean, drought-tolerant plants like rosemary, sedum, and creeping thyme, since they all want the same lean, well-drained conditions, and none of them will compete with lavender for water or nutrients. Plant 2. Sweet Alyssum. Sweet Alyssum is proof that effective weed suppression doesn't require a big, showy plant. This low, spreading annual grows only a few inches tall, but it forms a mat so dense and complete that weed seeds are left with nowhere to land and no light to germinate under. Its strategy is pure coverage. Sweet Alyssum branches and spreads aggressively from a young age, quickly knitting neighboring plants together into a continuous carpet. Within a few weeks of germination, the soil underneath is almost entirely shaded, which is exactly the condition weed seeds can't tolerate. It comes in white, various shades of pink and deep purple, and it releases a honey-like fragrance that becomes noticeably stronger in the cool of the evening. Sweet Alyssum is typically grown as a hardy annual and performs well almost everywhere in a single season, but in mild climates, roughly zones 9 through 11, it can self-seed and behave more like a short-lived perennial, returning on its own year after year. It prefers full sun to light shade and tolerates heat better than most people expect from a plant with such delicate-looking flowers. To use it as a weed suppressor rather than just a border flower, broadcast seed generously in spring directly where you want coverage, whether that's between vegetable rows are taller perennials or along the edges of a bed. Keep the soil consistently moist while it germinates and establishes, which usually takes 2 to 3 weeks. Once it's filled in, sweet Alyssum needs very little from you. It tolerates light foot traffic, bounces back from an occasional trim, and in many climates will reseed itself for next season without any replanting. Beyond weed control, sweet Alyssum is one of the best plants you can grow for beneficial insects. Its small flowers attract hoverflies and parasitic wasps that help control aphids and other garden pests, so you're getting pest management and weed suppression from the same low-growing plant. If bloom starts to slow in the peak of summer heat, a light shearing back by about a third will usually push out a fresh flush of flowers within a couple of weeks, which also tightens the mat back up if it started to look thin in the center. Sweet Alyssum is especially effective as an underplanting beneath taller vegetables and flowers, tomatoes, peppers, roses, or dahlias, where it shades the soil around the base of the taller plant, cuts down on splashback during watering, and keeps weeds from competing with your main crop for nutrients. Plant 3. Creeping Jenny. Creeping Jenny, also known as moneywort, is one of the most versatile ground covers available, and its weed-fighting ability comes almost entirely from how it spreads. Its trailing stems root at each node as they travel across the soil, meaning a single plant doesn't just grow outward, it actively colonizes new ground and anchors itself as it goes. That rooting habit is what makes it so effective against weeds. Once a mat of creeping jenny is established, there's no open soil left for a weed seed to settle into, and any seedling that does sprout underneath is shaded out almost immediately by the round, coin-shaped leaves above it. Creeping jenny is remarkably adaptable, growing in USDA zones 4 through 9 and tolerating everything from full sun to fairly deep shade, though its color is most vivid, a bright chartreuse gold, when it gets a few hours of direct sun. It prefers consistently moist soil but will tolerate short dry spells once its root system is established. A single small starter plant can spread to cover several square feet within one growing season, which makes it one of the fastest ways to fill in a problem area. It's particularly useful in spots that are awkward for other plants, trailing over the edge of a retaining wall, spilling out of a container, or filling the gaps between stepping stones and pavers where grass won't establish and weeds usually take over. Because it roots as it spreads, it also does a good job of stabilizing loose soil on mild slopes. The one thing to watch for is containment. In consistently moist, favorable conditions, creeping jenny can spread further than intended, so it's worth giving it a defined bed edge, a path, or a container boundary to work within, especially near a lawn or a bed of slower-growing perennials. Creeping jenny is also one of the better options for gardeners dealing with soggy, low-lying spots that stay wet after rain, conditions many other ground covers won't tolerate. Where standard turf grass thins out and struggles in that kind of moisture, creeping jenny will often fill in without complaint. For a striking visual pairing, plant it beneath taller purple or burgundy foliage, like a dark-leaved coral bell or a purple-leaf sedum, where the gold foliage creates a strong color contrast at ground level. Plant 4. Mint. Mint has a reputation that scares off a lot of gardeners, and for good reason. Left unchecked, it will spread further and faster than almost anything else you can plant. But that same aggressive spreading habit is exactly what makes it one of the most effective weed suppressors on this list, as long as you plant it with intention. Mint spreads through underground stems called rhizomes, which extend rapidly in every direction and send up new shoots as they travel. Below the surface, this creates a dense, interlocking root network that leaves weed seeds almost no undisturbed soil to germinate in. Above ground, mint's thick, leafy growth shades out anything trying to compete for light. The key to using mint successfully is controlling where that energy goes. The most reliable method is planting it in a large, bottomless container sunk into the ground, which allows the roots to spread downward and within the container's footprint, but blocks the rhizomes from escaping sideways into the rest of the bed. Buried root barriers, sheets of hard plastic or metal edging sunk at least 12 inches deep, work as an alternative for larger plantings. Without one of these two approaches, mint will move well past its intended area within a season or two. Mint grows in USDA zones 3 through 11 depending on the variety, prefers consistently moist soil, and tolerates full sun to partial shade. It's genuinely low maintenance once contained, needing onil. Why occasional watering and a yearly trim to keep growth fresh? The bonus with mint is obvious. You're growing a kitchen herb while it works. Spearmint and peppermint are the most common choices, but chocolate mint, apple mint, and pineapple mint all offer the same aggressive, weed-suppressing growth with different flavor and fragrance profiles, so you can pick based on how you actually plan to use it in the kitchen. Mint also has a long history as a companion plant near vegetable beds, where its strong scent is thought to help mask the smell of nearby crops from certain pests, including cabbage moths and aphids. Just keep it well outside the actual bed, in its own container, since the same rhizomes that make it a good weed suppressor will just as happily invade a bed of lettuce or beans if given the chance. If a planting starts to look tired or woody in the center after a couple of years, dig up a section, divide it, and replant, which keeps the growth fresh and vigorous. Plant 5 daylilies. Daylilies are grown for their trumpet-shaped blooms, but the real weed-fighting work happens underground, in a dense, fibrous, tuberous root system that thickens every year a clump is left undisturbed. As daylilies mature, their roots interlace into a compact mass that leaves very little space or available nutrients for weed seeds to establish nearby. Above ground, their long, arching, strap-like leaves form a canopy that shades the soil directly around the crown, which further limits light reaching any weed seedlings underneath. Established, mature clumps are genuinely difficult for weeds to compete with, which is part of why daylilies are such a common choice for large-scale roadside and municipal plantings, where maintenance budgets are limited. Daylilies grow in USDA zones 3 through 9 and tolerate full sun to light shade, though they bloom most heavily with at least 6 hours of direct sun. They're notably tolerant of heat, drought, and poor soil once established, and they're one of the more forgiving perennials for gardeners who don't want to fuss over watering schedules. Each individual flower opens for only a single day, which is where the name comes from. But a healthy, mature plant produces enough buds that a clump will flower continuously for 4 to 6 weeks, and some reblooming varieties extend that further into a second flush later in the season. Daylilies benefit from division every 3 to 5 years, once clumps become crowded. Far from being a chore, division is actually an opportunity. Dig up the clump, split it into smaller sections, and replant them to extend your weed-suppressing coverage into new areas of the garden, or share them with other gardeners. Popular varieties range from classic orange, Stella d'Oro, a reliable rebloomer, to a huge range of modern hybrids in nearly every color except true blue and pure white. Daylilies are also one of the few weed-suppressing perennials that genuinely thrive on slopes and roadside strips where erosion is a concern, since their fibrous root mass helps hold soil in place even on a grade. If you're working with a large area, mass planting a single reblooming variety, spaced about 18 inches apart, will close the canopy fastest and give you the most complete weed suppression within 2 growing seasons. Daylilies are also nearly pest-free compared to many other perennials, with few serious insect or disease problems in most home gardens, which is part of why they've become such a staple for gardeners who want reliable color without a long list of upkeep tasks. Plant 6. Hostas. For the shady, difficult corners of a yard where grass thins out and weeds seem to thrive anyway, hostas are one of the most dependable answers available. They're built for exactly those conditions. The mechanism is simple but highly effective: broad, overlapping leaves. A mature hostas canopy is dense enough to block the vast majority of sunlight from reaching the soil beneath it, keeping that soil cool, shaded, and consistently inhospitable to germinating weed seeds. Larger varieties can shade several square feet of ground per plant, and as clumps widen year after year, that coverage only becomes more complete. Hostas grow in USDA zones 3 through 9 and are true shade specialists, generally performing best in part to full shade, although some newer varieties tolerate more morning sun than older cultivars. They need only consistent moisture and a reasonably rich, well-drained soil to thrive, and their main long-term care requirement is division every few years once the center of an established clump begins to look crowded or open up. Part of what makes hostas so popular for weed-free shade gardens is the sheer range available. Sizes run from miniature varieties with leaves the size of a coin to giant cultivars with leaves over a foot wide. Colors span deep forest green, chartreuse and gold, blue-green, and heavily variegated types with white or cream edges, which means you can build an entire shaded bed using nothing but hostas and still get real visual variety. Many varieties also send up tall flower spikes in mid to late summer, typically in white or pale lavender, that carry a light fragrance and are a reliable draw for hummingbirds. The one significant drawback to be aware of is that hostas are a favorite food source for deer and slugs, so in areas with heavy deer pressure, some protection or a deer-resistant companion planting strategy is worth planning for alongside them. Slug damage shows up as ragged holes in the leaves and is usually worst in wet spring weather. Keeping mulch a few inches back from the crown, watering in the morning rather than the evening, and interplanting with deer and slug-resistant neighbors like ferns or astilbe can all help. When planting a new hosta bed, resist the urge to space plants at their eventual mature width from day one. Slightly tighter initial spacing closes the canopy faster, which means less bare soil, and therefore fewer weeds, in the first year or two while the plants are still filling in. Plant 7. Ferns. Ferns have been perfecting ground coverage for longer than almost any other plant group on Earth, and that long evolutionary head start shows in how effectively they compete for space in a shaded garden bed. Most garden ferns spread through rhizomes, underground stems that travel horizontally and send up new fronds at intervals as they go. Over time, this creates an increasingly dense colony with an extensive underground network, leaving weeds very little open soil to work with and very little light reaching the ground beneath the fronds above. Ferns are the natural choice for deep shade, the kind of spot under mature trees or on the north side of a house where few flowering plants perform well. Hardiness varies by species, but most common garden ferns grow well in zones 3 through 9. Christmas fern is evergreen through winter, giving you weed suppression and green structure even in the cold months. Japanese painted fern brings silvery, almost metallic color to shaded beds. Ostrich fern grows tall, often 3 to 4 feet, and works well as a dramatic backdrop or screen. Maidenhair fern is more delicate in appearance and prefers consistently moist, sheltered spots. Most ferns want consistently moist, well-drained, organically rich soil, similar to the conditions found on a forest floor, which makes sense given where most species originate. Once established, many varieties tolerate short dry spells, though prolonged drought will cause fronds to brown and die back. Ferns are also notably deer-resistant, which makes them a useful pairing with hostas in shaded beds where deer pressure is a concern, since the ferns are largely left alone even when hostas nearby are being browsed. Maintenance is minimal. An annual cleanup of dead fronds in early spring before new growth, or fiddleheads, emerge is typically all that's needed. Established fern colonies require very little in the way of fertilizing or ongoing care. Ferns work especially well layered with hostas and creeping jenny in a shaded bed, since combining a few different weed-suppressing plants with different growth habits, tall arching fronds, broad flat leaves, and a low trailing mat, closes off every level of the space, from the soil surface up. A shaded area planted this way typically reaches full, weed-resistant coverage faster than relying on a single species alone, since each plant is filling a slightly different gap. Plant 8. Creeping Thyme. Creeping thyme is one of the few ground covers that doubles as a walkable surface, which makes it especially useful in paths, between pavers, and in spots where you want weed suppression without sacrificing usable space. It forms a low, dense, evergreen or semi-evergreen mat that physically crowds out weed seedlings before they have room to establish. Like lavender, its foliage contains aromatic oils, and there's some evidence these compounds have a mild inhibiting effect on nearby weed germination, though the primary weed-fighting mechanism is still its tight, mat-forming growth habit that leaves essentially no bare soil exposed. Creeping thyme flowers in shades of pink, purple, or white, typically putting on its heaviest bloom in early summer, and releases a light, herbal fragrance whenever the foliage is brushed, crushed, or walked on. It grows in USDA zones 4 through 9, needs full sun to flower and spread well, and requires genuinely sharp, well-drained soil. Wet, heavy clay is the most common reason creeping thyme fails, since it's prone to root rot in soil that stays soggy. Because of its low profile and tolerance for light foot traffic, creeping thyme is a strong choice for the spaces between flagstones or pavers, where it fills gaps that would otherwise become a magnet for weeds, or for replacing a strip of lawn along a walkway. It's also highly drought-tolerant once established, making it well-suited to rock gardens, gravel beds, or hot, sunny slopes where irrigation is limited. Maintenance is minimal. An occasional light shearing after bloom keeps growth dense and encourages a tidier mat, but it isn't strictly necessary. Space new plants roughly 12 inches apart for full coverage within a season or two, and mulch lightly between them in the first year to keep weeds down while the thyme fills in. Because it can take foot traffic, creeping thyme is one of the few plants on this list that can genuinely replace a section of lawn, particularly in a hot, sunny spot where turf grass tends to thin out or go dormant in summer heat. It uses far less water than grass once established, never needs mowing, and rewards you with a flush of color and fragrance each summer that a lawn simply can't offer. Bees are especially drawn to creeping thyme when it's in bloom, so it's worth keeping that in mind if you're planting it directly along a path where people walk barefoot. Planting it slightly back from the main walking surface, and reserving the very center of a path for stepping stones or gravel gives you the coverage and the pollinator benefit without the risk of a sting underfoot. Plant 9. Sedum. Sedum, commonly known as Stonecrop, is about as low maintenance as a ground cover gets, and that toughness is a big part of why it works so well against weeds. Sedum's succulent leaves store water, which lets it shrug off drought, heat, and the kind of poor, rocky soil that would stress most other perennials. Low-growing, spreading varieties form a thick, almost moss-like mat over time that leaves weed seeds with no bare soil to colonize. In summer, that mat is topped with a wide flush of small, star-shaped flowers in shades of pink, yellow, or red, which are a reliable draw for bees and butterflies. Sedum grows in USDA zones 3 through 9, needs full sun for the best growth and flowering, and critically, requires well-drained soil. Unlike many other plants on this list, sedum's biggest enemy isn't drought, it's soil that stays consistently wet, which will rot its roots quickly. What makes sedum particularly valuable for practical, low-maintenance gardening is how little it asks for. It tolerates foot traffic, poor soil, extended dry periods, and general neglect better than almost anything else you could plant in a sunny spot. This makes it an excellent choice for hot, dry slopes, gravel gardens, green roofs, or the strip along a driveway where nothing else seems to survive. Low-growing spreading types, sometimes sold generally as creeping sedum, are the varieties best suited to weed suppression, as opposed to the taller, clump-forming types like autumn joy, which are grown more for their upright flower displays than for ground coverage. Space-creeping varieties 12 to 18 inches apart and expect full coverage within 1 to 2 growing seasons. Once established, sedum needs essentially no supplemental watering except during severe, prolonged drought. Sedum is also one of the easiest plants on this list to propagate for free. A broken-off piece of stem, even just a few inches long, will often root directly in the soil if simply pressed into place and kept lightly moist for a couple of weeks. This makes it inexpensive to fill in a large area over time, buy or start with a few plants, and take cuttings each season to expand your coverage without any additional cost. Sedum also holds up unusually well through winter in colder zones. While the foliage of many low-growing varieties dies back or bronzes with frost, the root system stays intact, and the plant returns reliably each spring, often filling in even more thickly than the year before. Plant 10. Creeping Phlox. Creeping Phlox closes out this list with one of the most visually dramatic displays of any ground cover on it. In early to mid-spring, a mature planting erupts into a nearly solid sheet of star-shaped blooms in pink, purple, red, or white, blanketing slopes, borders, and rock walls before most other perennials have even woken up for the season. Its weed-fighting mechanism works on 2 levels, matching its 2 seasons of usefulness. During bloom, the sheer density of flowers and foliage leaves no visible soil at all. After flowering ends, the plant's low, needle-like, semi-evergreen foliage remains and continues doing the work, forming a tight mat that blocks light and crowds out weed seedlings through summer, fall, and into winter in milder climates. Creeping Phlox spreads by trailing stems that root loosely as they grow, gradually knitting neighboring plants into one continuous mat. It thrives in USDA zones 3 through 9, prefers full sun to light shade, and is drought-tolerant once established, though regular watering during the first 2 to 3 months after planting is important while its root system develops. 2 closely related species are typically sold under this name. Phlox subulata, sometimes called moss phlox, has needle-like foliage, stays lower to the ground and wants full sun. Phlox stolonifer has broader, oval leaves and tolerates a bit more shade. Both are widely available and behave similarly enough that either works well for weed suppression. A light shearing after the flowers fade, cutting plants back by about half, encourages denser regrowth and can trigger a lighter second bloom later in the season. Popular varieties include emerald blue for its lavender blue flowers, scarlet flame for its deep, saturated red, and candy stripe for its distinctive pink and white bicolor blooms. It's an excellent choice for cascading over a retaining wall, covering a slope prone to erosion, or edging a sunny border where you want both color and coverage from a single low-maintenance plant. Creeping Phlox pairs especially well with spring bulbs like daffodils and tulips, since its low mat fills in and hides the bulb foliage as it yellows and dies back after bloom, a stage that otherwise leaves an unattractive gap in the bed and an opening for weeds. Planting phlox around the base of a bulb bed gives you continuous color from very early spring through summer, while keeping that transition period fully covered. 10 plants, 10 different strengths, but they all work the same basic way. Cover the soil, block the light, and leave weeds with nowhere to grow. Pick a few that match your sun, shade, and climate, give them a season to establish, and you'll spend a lot less time weeding and a lot more time enjoying the garden you've built. If this was useful, subscribe to Senior's Gardening Advice for more, And let me know in the comments which one you're planting first.